In this video, we're going to do a quick overview of the security module that comes with Webiny. So in our Webiny instance, if we go to the main menu and then under settings, we have a couple of items that we're going to look at, mainly API keys, roles, teams, and users. So let's go here first on the users. And if you click on a user, we'll have their profile picture if it's populated, some basic information, as well as email and password that they use to log in. And then the more interesting bit, which are roles and teams. So every user can either belong to a team or can have one or more roles associated with their account. So here, if we add another role, it's just going to show up here. Roles are a definition of individual permissions that user can perform. So one role describes one set of permissions. And we're going to cover roles in a moment. A team, however, comes with one or more roles associated. So if I wanted to give this user multiple different, let's say, fine-grained permissions, I would need to define multiple roles and then assign all of these individual roles here. And then if I had 10 users where I wanted all 10 of them to have that same access level, I would need to do that 10 times. For that reason, because it's not very efficient, we have teams. Teams are a wrapper around multiple roles. So you create a team and you associate multiple roles to that team. And then for every user that you want to have those same permissions, you just add them to the team. Or if, let's say, they leave the company, you remove them from that team. So it's a much more efficient way of management. We support both. The difference is that, let's say, in the basic open source version of Webiny, you have the ability to associate only one role to a user and you can't utilize the team functionality. However, in the enterprise, you can do as many roles as you want, as well as many teams as you want. All right, so now let's have a look at the teams. So here, if I were to create a new team, we can give it a name, demo team, give it a slug. And then we associate multiple roles to this team. So we can now save that team. And again, we can create multiple teams with different combinations of roles. Now that we created our team, we can go to users, open our user, and associate the user with a team. By doing this, our user will inherit all of the roles that are defined in this team. Now, Webiny also supports the ability for associating a user with multiple teams. Again, because Webiny is designed for enterprise use cases, we saw situations where companies have thousands of content editors that manage content in the very different silos and hubs, and there's quite a lot of complex permissions that such an organization needs to be able to translate into Webiny. And with the ability for having multiple teams per user, we're allowing such complex structures to be easily created within Webiny and managed throughout the lifecycle of such requirement. Now that we associated our team to our user, if we just save the user, now this user has all the permissions again defined within that team. Let's now look at roles. So roles are the actual definition of those permissions that a user is able to perform. By default, when you install Webiny, there's an anonymous role and a full access role. These are built-in roles that Webiny needs in order to function properly. But then on top of that, you can create custom roles. Every role essentially contains a set of permissions, and those permissions are grouped by applications. So here, first of all, because Webiny supports content organization in multiple locales, you can say, hey, does this role allow users to access the content within multiple locales or within a specific locale or just on all locales? Here we're going to select all locales, and then we can go based on the application level. Hey, what can this user do in the page builder? Do they have no access to the module, or do they have access so they can do anything in the module for managing templates, blocks, pages, menus, whatever is needed, or if you want custom access. So the custom access then works depending on the scope So here, let's say for pages, we want to say what content the user can access, all content or only content created by this user. This is quite useful when you're building a SaaS application where a user can only see their own content. So if you do this, the user will only be able to see the content that they've created or manage. Or in this case, you can select all content, and then what can the user do? Can they read, write, delete? Can they publish or unpublish? And things like that. Some users prefer to use this access with roles. However, the folder level permission access that we demonstrated in the earlier videos come on top of this. So you can use this to restrict, for example, the publishing and unpublishing actions for the user, but then use the folder level permissions to go deeper into your content and say, hey, this user can only view content in this subfolder and edit content in this other subfolder. So you overlay different permission sets on top of the role that you've created by utilizing the folder level permissions. So you can really fine tune what an individual user or an individual team can do within the application. Now, a typical example of a setup would be, for example, let's do headless CMS. I would give my users, let's say, custom access in a way that I would say, hey, you can access the APIs. Now, the API access is needed because it happens under the hood. The user doesn't see it, but depending on what API endpoints you select, you will have different options here. And typically for a content editor, what you would do is you wouldn't allow them to manage groups. So here it's enough to just give them the read access. Same as for content models, they can only read. So you don't want them to be able to manage models, groups, and things like that. But you want to give them the ability to manage entries and give them the full permission there. Right? So we can save this role. So in this role, I can easily associate it with my content editors. And then on top of this role, so let's say I move this role to here. And we're going to remove the other roles. We don't need it. And now any user that, let's say any content editor that I associate this role, they will be able to manage all the content inside Webiny Headless CMS. But then I want to drill deeper into that. What I will do is, hey, I can say under articles, let's say I have articles based on language. So English. So I got a team that writes only English content, and I've got a team that writes German content. All right. So what I can then do is I can have a specific set of users or a specific team. I can say, hey, this demo team can write content in the English and view the content in the English folder. And I'll save that. But they won't be able to see the German, right? Or I can say, hey, they can see the German one, but they can't edit, right? Because sometimes users go to, we saw that often where users from one region want to see how some other team in another region build the content, but they should not be able to edit that content. But they want to learn how they built it so they can do the same thing on their end, right? So this way you can create the permissions, who can see which applications and perform which operations within those. And then based on the content level, using the advanced content organization with folders and subfolders, you further take care of individual access on a content level. Lastly, to mention our API keys. So they work the same way as permissions, as roles, but they are primarily used for programmatic access. So let's say I want to have an API key, right? And only content from the articles and all entries, right? Primary action here is disabled because the read API only allows us to do exactly that, just read content. So there's no option for the user to utilize this API key to write, update, delete stuff. But this is a typical example where you create an API key for your application that needs to only perform read operations. So you do custom access, you select the read endpoint, and you select only specific models. And then you save that key. And here now you have your token. You basically use that token inside the authentication bearer header, provide it there, and you'll be able to access the read API on the Webiny endpoint. One thing I didn't mention before is how does Webiny resolve permissions in terms of determining if a user can perform a certain action. Well, Webiny works in a way that as long as that action is permitted by any of the roles attached either directly to the user or attached to the team that the user belongs to, the user will be able to perform that action. So it's a permissive approach to permission resolution. If you allow users in any of the roles to do something, they will be able to do that, regardless if another role restricts it. So just be careful with that approach. Keep that in mind whenever you are adding multiple roles to a team or to a user. Regarding the programmatic access, if you need more instructions on how to set it up, we have a tutorial under the headless CMS. So here there's an article called Using the GraphQL API. And in there, we'll skip this first section. There's this section called programmatic access. Essentially, because Webiny runs on a GraphQL server, you need a GraphQL client to access it. But once you install a client in your application, all you need to then do is create that API key that we just showed, add it here, and you'll be able to then perform all of the actions that are permitted under that key. Again, use this article as a guide and as a reference point. One additional thing to mention with regards to the security on Webiny is that Webiny also integrates with several known IDP providers such as Okta, Auth0, Cognitive Federation. But this is not the full list. Even if you have a custom-made single sign-on system, Webiny can integrate with that purely because we provide a framework through which you can adopt how the security flows on both authentication and authorization look like. You can take full control over that and integrate with any third party, or you can change the workflows, fire different events, intercept those events, and essentially have full control over that process. And regarding that security framework that I mentioned, so if you go to the root of our docs portal under security, you'll find the security framework section, which gives you instructions as well as an overview of how the specific processes work in Webiny. This is useful because if you are building a custom API endpoint or a custom client-side application and you want to tie that to the security module so that in that list of drop-downs you insert additional permissions that you can then assign to your users for your custom-made app. So this section here in our docs portal gives you a full overview of how to do exactly that. Okay, so in this video, we've provided an overview of the Webiny security module. We looked at how do you create users, what type of permissions users can have, how permissions are organized through roles as well as through teams, how do you assign users to teams as well. We also looked at how the permissions work in conjunction with folder level permissions. We mentioned several of the different IDP integrations that Webiny has, and we had a quick look at the security framework, which allows you to customize all of the things related to security with regards to authorization, authentication, integration, as well as introduce new custom permission sets. I hope this overview of the Webiny security module was valuable to you, and I'll see you on the next one.